Well, I have to say, I am seriously concerned and slightly disappointed in the recent package of measures which are designed to cut the prison population by almost 10,000 by the year 2028, because it seems to be going a little bit soft on criminals. So it seems to me that we're running out of space. We have fewer than 1,000 places left, with 75,000 cases in the Crown Court backlog. So a package of measures seems to be, let's send fewer people to prison, let's let people out of prison early, and that'll help with the overcrowding issue. Instead of perhaps looking at the ECHR issues, which prevent us from deporting foreign criminals and deporting the 10 or so thousand that are in the prison system at the moment that are foreign national criminals. That would seem to be quite an easier option to free up 10,000 spaces in the prison system rather than letting people out early. So you've obviously heard about this chemical castration in the news. It's not as you might be forgiven that it sounds. It doesn't chemically remove anything. It rather does some more chemical functions and reduces the tendencies of those people to commit certain offences. And it may not be a permanent change. It may revert after the chemicals stop. More about that in a little bit more detail. But first of all, please do subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate you doing that. It helps the channel grow. And I have to ask, otherwise nobody subscribes. So thank you very much for that. So first of all, the chemical castration thing is not a new thing. In fact, it's been going on for quite a long time. But the biggest shake-up today was that Shabana Mahmood, our Justice Secretary, said that she is considering mandatory chemical castration for those that are convicted of really serious sex offences. However, that will not be without its challenge under ECHR. Like everything else, I'll come back to you with a case in a moment, which is a stark example of where ECHR and the Article 3, Article 8 rights have prevented us from deporting somebody who was convicted of very serious offences of exactly this nature. So along as announcing that she's considering making this a mandatory thing, apparently killers, rapists and other dangerous criminals will also be released early after serving only half of their sentences. Now, I do understand that there is a wealth of research as to whether or not a custodial sentence really does have the desired effect on offenders, i.e. to prevent them from reoffending and so on, as opposed to rehabilitative measures. But I really can't get away from the fact that this really is a bit of an insult to each of the victims of those really serious and heinous offences, and obviously the families of the victims of those that have been killed. But aside from that, judges are also now apparently going to get powers to punish lower-level criminals for unrelated offences, with bans on travel, bans on driving, bans on attending football matches, or bans on using social media, and to quote the paper, hit offenders where it hurts. Now, this is a double-edged sword. Now, I'm not sure whether you're aware, but if somebody is convicted of a football-related offence, then the court will go on to consider whether there is an ancillary order, such as banning them from football matches, a football banning order, as we call it. And so if their big thing is football and they've committed an offence whilst at a football match or something to do with the football afterwards or whatever, then banning them from the football match, believe it or not, is quite a bigger deterrent for many people than actually going to prison for it. So the court has been using this for a very long time. So this is one thing that I can see working, because the football banning is something that they can actually put into effect and monitor. But if they are low-level criminals, I am a little bit dubious as to whether bans on travel, bans on driving, and bans on using social media are actually going to be effective at all. How are they going to police those, and how are they going to make sure that those actually happen? I do see the force in the argument that if they did work, it would be quite useful, but I just can't see it being policed properly. And all of this, you understand, whilst they're trying to free up spaces by not sending anyone to prison for less than 12 months, unless it is in exceptional circumstances. And instead, the plan is that they'll be punished by an expansion of all those community sentences that I've just mentioned, and that they will try to deport foreign criminals after serving only 30% of their sentence, leaving them free to enter the communities back in their home countries. But this raises another problem, because if they do want to deport those criminals after serving a portion of their sentence, presumably they let them out to be deported. But at that point, we bring in another case here, which we might talk about the ECHR, because this one that's covered in splattered highlights over here was my research from the headline from the Daily Mail. You might read the Daily Mail and some people just say, well, this is just a headline grabbing your attention, it's possibly not real, etc. But it is. I look into these things and I check whether they're right, and usually they're right, to be fair to the Daily Mail. If you look at this headline here and read the first bit to yourselves, it says that he won a battle to stay in the UK because he faces a fatwa if he returns to his home country. So I took the liberty of finding that judgment so I can read little bits of it to you. And indeed, that's where we are now. Because we find these out when they go to the upper tribunal, i.e. they're on appeal from the first tier tribunal, which are not always reported in the public domain. So in this case, this guy, the appellant, appeals with permission against a first tier tribunal judge who dismissed his appeal against the decision to refuse to revoke a deportation order against him and refused his protection claim. In English, and working backwards, he had an order for deportation. He asked for that to be revoked, and that was refused, so he appealed against that, and now he's appealing against that decision to dismiss that appeal, and that's why it's in the tribunal. But the first tier tribunal pretty much ruled that he should be deported, but the upper tribunal has now said that it's got to go back to the first tier tribunal on these human rights grounds. Allow me to explain, but let me first explain what he's done. And again, this is not me spreading hate. This is in the public domain, it's in the public interest, and you deserve to know about it. And I aim to assist you in understanding it. So this makes quite clear that he is a foreign national criminal. So remembering that we have a shortage in the prison system, we have over 10,000 foreign national criminals in the prison system, fewer than 1,000 places available, and all of these packages and measures that are letting people out early and softer punishments, etc., in some cases, is to free up around about 10,000 spaces in several years' time, as opposed to the 10,000 odd that we could deport straight away if we ignored ECHR like this. I'm not saying that we should, it's just an idea that people put forward. So in this case, he was charged and convicted with having sex with a girl between 13 and 16 years of age. Now, bearing in mind the other sentences that we've seen recently, such as Lucy Connolly serving 31 months in prison for a single tweet, albeit a horrible tweet, but a single tweet nonetheless, this chap was sentenced to a 3-year probation order and 240 hours of community service. However, in 2013, a few years later, he was further convicted of another offence of the same nature with another girl of the same age, where he intentionally or recklessly, and you can read the rest of that yourself. YouTube. He was sentenced this time to 3.5 years in prison with an extended period, you can use your imagination, an extended period of 2 years. So the aggregate therefore was 5.5 years. He was also placed on the register for an indefinite period, made subject to a sexual offences prevention order, and did not appeal his conviction or sentence. As a result of all of this, he was made the subject of a deportation order, and his human rights claim was refused and certified. A judicial review was withdrawn. Later on, a Stage 2 decision and deportation order was made later in 2015. Then his protection and human rights claims were refused, and it was considered that his deportation would not breach Article 8, as the public interest in deporting him outweighs his right to a family life. That was the fact that he had a connection to a child. More about that a bit later. So then he asserted that he had a well-founded fear of persecution and was at risk of suffering harm if he returned to Pakistan because knowledge of his crimes had become known in the community, and therefore he might be subject to a fatwa. Then I'll link this judgment below. You can read all of the rest of it yourself. But in short, the upper tribunal concluded that it's got to go back to the first tier tribunal, and the judge said that he was satisfied that the decision with regard to Article 3, that is not being tortured or degrading and inhumane treatment, will need to be remade by the lower tier tribunal. The judge said he was satisfied by matters raised in the additional bundles that it should be remitted back to the first tier tribunal, and in consequence there may be findings about where he can live in Pakistan. Thus, the judge also set aside the Article 8 finding to be remade. But as it happens, by the time it gets back to the first tier tribunal, the child may be 18 and therefore that argument may fall away. But nonetheless, this will now go back to the first tier tribunal, and so round and round we go. And as I mentioned in previous videos, there are thousands of people that may well be making such claims, and they are foreign national criminals, and therefore if they are making these ECHR claims and we cannot deport them, then likewise there may be countless other claims to be made. And case in point, the chemical castration that we talked about earlier in the video, and it's always been voluntary, and it's been going on for quite a while, and it's so-called medication to manage problematic sexual arousal. But Shabana Mahmood said she's considering making this approach mandatory. And I think that will give rise to an ECHR claim, and it will probably send medical practitioners into quite the debate, because all of these things and any kind of procedure are supposed to be consensual. Unless, of course, there's a risk to your life, and that's the one time that, unless you've got documents that say, do not revive, do not resuscitate, do not revive, or whatever, then unless your life is at stake and they can't communicate with you, they are at duty to do their best to save your life. Apart from all of those scenarios, your consent is paramount. So if they make them mandatory, I can see that being open to challenge, just like all of these others are open to challenge. But one of the key elements that they say will earn the most space back in the prison cells is earned progression, which again, I understand there's extensive research behind rehabilitative measures rather than simply punitive punishment, but you may be a little bit dubious to learn that this will allow most prisoners through this earned progression model to be released after serving only a third of their sentences, if they behave well. So an incentive to behave well, yes. Will it really work? Who knows? We may find out. But we may find out the hard way. There is obviously a lot more to this story. I can't possibly cover it all in one short video, so I will link the article, I'll link the document. Go and read them if you are of interest. Don't rely solely on my video or even one article for that matter, but do your own research if you want to form your own opinions. But I just hope to shed a bit of light on a few of these issues with a few thoughts that I have. And with that, please let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below, and I'll see you in the next one.